Hey everybody, in today's video I'm going to show a real important part of understanding voice leading in chord movement, but also for creating lines that have voice leading. Ultimately this stuff can be used for playing chords, playing chord melody, playing chord solos, and playing individual lines. And I think it's important to see these things that are really quite simple, but we don't always see them that directly because they're sort of hidden in all these block chords that we learn. So check this out. I'm going to do this over the progression of Autumn Leaves, and here we go. What I'm going to do here is basically play the 3rd and 7th of each chord, and that's going to be based on an interval. It's either going to be a 5th, a 4th, or a tritone. And I've done similar things to this before, but this one is good because it will show you how the entire cadence for the A section of Autumn Leaves works and how it moves from the very top here. I'm going to be actually on the 10th and 12th fret here and go all the way down to the open strings. So I'm starting off with this 5th, and this is the 3rd and 7th of my A minor. I can put the root in there, and the PDF has the root to show you the relationship of what it is, but what you also have to understand is that there is in this position here a triad. That you could use the 3rd up an octave would be here, C major, or down an octave here. And this is actually good because the G and D strings on the guitar will help you to break up the functions of the strings. And what I mean by that is if you have an orchestra or you have a big band, each instrument has their register. And obviously the middle strings here are important to the overall development of chords that we play on the guitar, because generally we have these block chords, and in the middle there's this chunk of information that sits in the middle, which it should, and then up here are the extensions and the alterations and all those things, and below for the most part are the bass notes. Not always, because the extensions and the alterations can also be on the lower strings, and just because I'm doing this on strings 3 and 4 doesn't mean I don't want to transfer the information to the other strings, because I do ultimately. But for this exercise you're going to actually see how this translates to moving the whole cadence down and seeing the possibility of adding either the bass notes or the extensions, or in some cases the alterations. So we're going to start here. This is A minor, so it's a 5th. What's going to happen is we're going to move that top note down to this tritone. So the bottom note stays the same for the first 2 chords. This is A minor. Here's the root. So A minor 7 is my chord. And then lowering that top note, now it becomes a D7. So it's a tritone, right? It's still the 3rd and 7th of that D7. And then I'm going to resolve here on my G. This is G major, 7. There's the 3rd and 7th, and there's the root. And then this is going to become a 4th for the C major 7. And then we're going to do this for the F sharp half diminished. We're going to make this 5th, which has the flat 3rd and the flat 7. Now usually we think of a half diminished as being this, because that's how it's built on the guitar with the flat 5 and the 7 up here, but we're leaving the flat 5 out. We don't need it. That chord can function just as well as F sharp minor or F sharp minor 7 flat 5. But we have to hear in our heads that flat 5 note, that note, whether it's down in that register or up an octave. And then I'm going to move that 5th down, top note, to this tritone, and that's B7. And then for my final chord, I'm going to move the whole thing down to this 5th, and now I have E minor. So here's the cadence in real time. Now I can easily add the root to it, and I'd have this. The other thing you can do now is do that same cadence and continue down to the end of the guitar neck. And by doing that, I would want to do in between my E minor 7 and my next A minor, I'm going to want to put an E7 because that's the secondary dominant. It gets you back to that A minor if you're doing Autumn Leaves in the first time around. So I'm going to just take that 5th and I'm going to move the bottom note up a half step, and now I have E7. And then I'm going to go here to this 4th, which is now my A minor 7. You'll note there's a 4th down here. When I move it up here for the A minor, the 3rd and 7th, they invert and they become a 5th. Now this is going to happen too on the other sets of strings. You've got the 4th here, take that top note and move the bottom note up an octave, and there's your 5th. So you could do the same thing on those sets of strings to get to know the relationships of those intervals. Really, really important, guys. I mean, I can't stress it enough. Even if you've been playing guitar for 35 years or 40 years and you know every chord, you know all the standards, go back and do this because it will give you a new perspective of things you've been doing for years and help you really, really target what's going on inside the harmony. So now I've got A minor 7. I'm going to lower the bottom note to the tritone. Tritones never change. They're always a tritone. They'll invert themselves, but they will not change the shape itself. So this is going to be our D7. And then for our G major 7, we have a 4th now because we had a 5th up there. And then for the C major 7, we had a 4th up here. We're going to have a 5th down here. And then for the F sharp half diminished, we've got a 4th. Now we have a tritone for the B7. And then for my E minor 7, just playing the D and G strings open. And this is what it sounds like with the root note. And I'll start with the E7. Now the next thing you can do with this is take those intervals and make lines out of them, because they are lines. So if I'm playing Autumn Leaves, I can simply just take the top and the bottom note and do things like this. So you can hear the melody throughout those lines. When you outline those sounds of the chords, the harmony and melody become very, very visible. This is the skeletal part of the chord, and by having that basis of what's going on there, you really start to understand what's happening harmonically. Plus you're going to see and hear the voice leading, because when you have certain notes and certain chords, they don't move as much as other notes do, meaning that there are more important notes in a chord that really define the motion, where other ones are more passive. And it's important to understand which ones are the dominant sounds. And I'm not talking about dominant 7, I'm talking about the dominant notes in the chords that create the voice leading. Because in this case, when the 3rd and 7th move, the bottom note there just stays. It's common to both chords. And now the top note is common to the next chord and the second chord. Whereas now the bottom note is common to this chord and this chord. And the same thing happens over and over again. But if I add an extension to it now, let's say I'm going to go up here and add the 9. Now I can go chromatically for the next chord, and I can go chromatically again. And you can see that with just that 2-5-1, this is the most amount of movement in that cadence. These guys are just kind of doing what they're doing. But this adds a whole new dimension. Have to move that top note. I could keep that top note there and do that, and then when I move down here, that's staying diatonically. But if I want to do the chromatic movements, which is important to see because that gives us a window into getting some of these extensions and some of these alterations that make the harmony more interesting. I have the 11 now on top with the 9. Now if I'm going to do the next motion, which is going to be this moving down, this is going to move up, and I have this. Now, when I get to this chord here, I can put the E on top. It's really important to understand that voice leading, the chords themselves are going to tell us what they want to do. It's our job to react and decide, do we want to go this way or that way. They'll give us a couple of options, but in most cases it's going to tell you very strongly what it wants to do. And it's our job to follow that and hopefully make sense out of it musically. The next thing you can do with this exercise is, instead of taking the bass note, just take the top note and you'd have this. You'd have A minor 9, and then you'd have the D7 sharp 5, and then the G major 9, and then C major 7. Now for my half diminished, I'm going to keep that G, F sharp half diminished, and that is the flat 9 on top. Now I've got B7, don't have any alterations there yet, and then I've got E minor 9, and then I've got E7 flat 9, A minor 7. There's a triad, there's a couple triads you might have seen, and then we've got another triad, that's D7 flat 9, and then G major 7, and then C major 9, and then F sharp half diminished, there's another triad, and then here's the B7 flat 9, and then the last chord is your E minor 7. Now there's a couple different things you could do at the end there, because when you get to that half diminished and then you go to the dominant 7, you could keep that C on top, or you could let the B come in, which would do this. With the B coming in, it would do this. And leaving the C on top, you've got... both valid. It's just a question, do you want more tension on top when you have the dominant 7, or do you want to let that resolve? And these are things that, you know, we can't think of these things while we're playing in real time. They're just things that happen on the fly, and it's like deciding, do I want to use a verb here, do I want to use that adjective? I mean, we don't think like that when we speak. We have our vocabulary and we just let it come out. So this is what you want to do to get your vocabulary together, is do this slowly, then put it into context. Use it as a comp, 2-note, 3-note, and then add the extensions, add the alterations. But always keep that interval in mind. It's either going to be a fifth, a fourth, or a tritone.